So today is, or maybe was, Shivasa Tammuz, which always comes out, Besmichus to Parshas Pinchas. You know, the Shloah Kodesh says that Hakoil Miyad Hashem Hiskil, that all the Moyadim fall out in particular Parshas. There's a reason. But you know, the fact that Shivasa B'Tammuz comes out in Parshas Pinchas is l'chor chiddush, because we would say at first glance that it's the most inappropriate place for Shivasa B'Tammuz to fall out. Parshas Pinchas has the karbonis of all the Yomim Tovim, of all the Moyadim, and Shivasa B'Tammuz is the beginning of the 3 weeks of mourning. So how is it that Shivasa B'Tammuz comes out in Parshas Pinchas? You know, the Mishnah in Tainus says that 5 things happened on Shivasa B'Tammuz. The first is that Nishtabru ha-luchos. You know, the egel was made on the 16th day of Tammuz. As Rashi says in Parshas Kisisa, Vayar ha'om ki boishesh Moshe l'redes minahor. Yeah, his return was delayed. Why was it delayed? Because they thought that the Arboim Yoim, Moshe promised them that he's coming back in 40 days. When did he promise it? On Zion Sivan. No, they thought that Zion Sivan is Min HaMinyan, that it's counted into the count, and according to that, it came out that Tes Zion Tammuz was already the 40th day, and Moshe Rabbeinu didn't return, and that's Vayara Om Ki Boishesh Moshe. And then they made the egel. Moshe came down on the next day. He came down on Shivasa B'Tammuz. And then it says, Vayar es ha'egel u'mechoylois, vayichar af Moshe, vayashlech miyodov, es haluchois, vayishaber oisam tachas lahar. So the mechoylois, the celebrations were taking place on the 17th day of Tammuz, even though they already made the egel on the 16th of Tammuz. How did that come about? Because Aaron, as we know, after the egel was made, Aaron said, Vayar Aaron, Vayiven mizbeach lefono, vayoyme chag laHashem mochor. Tomorrow will be the Yom Tov. And then vayashkimu mimochros, vayalu oilois, vayagishu shlomim, vayeshiv amlechol v'shoseh ve'ekumu letzachik. So the reason that their celebration was tomorrow, was on Shivasa B'Tammuz, was because Aaron pushed them off. He pushed them off. Rashi said, why did he say Chag LaHashem Mochar? Zok Rashi v'loy hayoyim. Because he was thinking Shema Yovoy Moshe Koidim Shiavdu. Maybe Moshe will return, and the whole thing will be avoided. But then Rashi brings another pshat in the name of the Medrash, Chag LaHashem Beliboy Hoyo LaShomayim Batuach Hoyo Sheyovoy Moshe v'Yavdu Es HaMokoim. He was sure that by the time tomorrow comes around, Moshe Rabbeinu will return, and Chag LaHashem Mochar, he really meant LaShomayim, not the way they understood. So in the Likutei Torah of the Arizal, it says on this pasuk, Vayoyme Chag LaHashem Mochar, he says, B'zeh Loshen, Hine Teima Gedoyla B'davar Zeh. Ukfar tirtzu zal milas vayiven mizbeach LaHashem, shekavanosoi l'shem Shamayim. That when he built the Mizbeach, it was LaHashem, shekavonosoi l'shem Shamayim. Achachag hazeh maye omer boy. Why was he saying that tomorrow is going to be a Yom Tov? What kind of Yom Tov? Ve'eich kosva ha'Torah plastor. Ve'eich yotzu dvarim ka'ela mipi aroim. Yes, so what was the Chag? Omnom Soid ha-nimrotz bozeh, ki ha'egel nase b'tes Zion Tammuz, u'b'yud Zion nishtabru aluches, v'osed HaKadosh Baruch Hu l'hofchor l'yom tov. Nimtza ki chag LaHashem mochor, ki yesh mochor la'achar zman, v'chein mashma b'divrei Razal. So the Arizal is saying that it was true, chag LaHashem mochor, not the mochor of tomorrow, but the Machar will eventually become a Chag LaHashem, and that's the Machar LaChazman. Shivasa B'Tammuz will become a Yom Tov. The Etzem Zach that Shivasa B'Tammuz will become a Yom Tov is the Chnad HaChiddush of the Arizal. It's a Mefurish Pasuk in Malachi, in Zechariah, that says, Ko Yomar Hashem Tzvakois, Tzoim HaRevi, which is the Chodesh HaRevi, which is Shivasa B'Tammuz, V'Tzoim HaChamishi, which is Tisha B'Av, in the Chodesh HaChamishi, V'Tzoim HaShvi, which is Asar B'Tevis, which is in the Chodesh HaShvi, V'Tzoim HaAsiri is Asar B'Tevis, in the Chodesh HaAsiri, so it will be transformed into a Yom Tov. So Mamela, it's not such a chiddush that Shiva Asa B'Tammuz comes out in Parshas Pinchas when we read the Karbonos of the Moyadim, because Shiva Asa B'Tammuz is also a Yom Tov. It will eventually be a Yom Tov. You know, the Parsha of Karbonos, the Parsha of the Karbonos of Moyadim begins with the Karban HaTamid. And this is also one of the 5 things that Iru Lavoiseinu B'Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, that Butal HaTamid. So, I want to suggest that the renewal of the Hakrovas Karban HaTamid B'Meira B'Yomeinu has a particular shayches to Parshas Pinchas. You know, the Mishnah says in Menachos Daf Memtes, Ein mechanchin es hamizbeach elo b'tomid shel shachar. The first carbon that is brought on a new mizbeach is the tomid shel shachar. In other words, besides for the general halacha that we have that the tomid every day comes before the karbonis of the day, there's another halacha that a new mizbeach needs to have a chinuch with a tomid shel shachar. The Rambam in Hilchos Midin Musafin says, To'u oishogegu, afila hezidu, v'lo yikrivu tamid shel shachar, yakrivu tamid shel b'nai abayim. That if they didn't bring a tamid shel shachar one day, you bring a tamid shel b'nai abayim. The tamid shel shachar is not ma'akiv. B'med dvorim amurim b'shenes chanei chamizbeach. This is only true in a mizbeach that's already mechunach. Avalim hoyo mizbeach chodosh. It was a new mizbeach, she'adayin lo yikorav olav klum, that no carbon was ever brought on this mizbeach. Lo yakrivu olav tchila bein ha'abayim. She'ein mechanchim mizbeach ha'oilo elo b'tomid shel shachar. Okay. So there's a halacha that the mizbeach has to be started with a tomid shel shachar dafka, and you can't bring any other karbonis before you bring that tomid shel shachar on the new mizbeach. Now, just like there's a din chinuch for the mizbeach, there's a din chinuch for the kohen. As it's Mavurim Menachos Daf Nun Aleph, Kohen Einoi Oived Ad Sheyovi Asiris Ha'efa Mishaloi, which is called a Minchas Chavitin. That's how a kohen is Mischanech La'avoida. The Rambam in Hilchos Klei Hamikdosh says, Ein HaKohen Oived Chila Ad Sheyovi Asiris Ha'efa Mishaloi, V'oivda B'yodoi, Shenemar Zeh Korban Aaron Uvonav Asher Yakrivu L'Hashem B'yoim Hi Moshach Oisoi, V'im Ovad Koidim She Yovi Asiris Ha'efa, V'chein Kohen Godel She'ovad B'kohen Gdoile, Koidim She'yovi Asiris Ha'efa, Avodah Ksher. But now the question is, how are we going to start the Avodah La'asid Lavoi? We're going to have a new Mizbeach, obviously, that nothing was ever korev on, and a new Mizbeach needs to have a chinuch with a tomid shel shachar. The Kohanim will need a chinuch with a minchas chavitin. And it's even though the Kohanim, even if we'll already have Tchias HaMesim, and we'll have Kohanim that were once Kohanim Meshuchim and Mechunachim, the Ramban writes Mefurish in the Shorish Gimel and Sefer HaMitzvahs that the Kohanim La'asid Lavoi will need a chinuch because their chinuch is bottled with their death, and there'll be Anoshim Mechudashim, he writes, and Avada they'll need a chinuch, and that's why it's a mitzvah Negesh L'Doros. In any case, they'll need a chinuch. They'll need a chinuch. So the Kohanim need a chinuch with what? With a Tamid Shel, with a Minchas Chavitim. The Mizbeach needs a chinuch with a Tamid Shel Shachar. So how are we going to start the Avodah? Where are we going to start? We can't get started. So it's true that the Rambam says that if a Kohen did Avodah without bringing a Minchas Chinuch, a Minchas Chavitin, his avodah is kosher b'di'evet. Actually, the Marikurkus brings that there's a girsa in the Teres Kohanim that his avodah is possible, but the Rambam says his avodah is kosher. Also in the halacha of Ein Mechanchin Esa Mizbeach Elo B'Tomid Shel Shachar, the Brisker Rav is medayik that this is also only L'chatchila, because the Rambam says Mizbeach Chodesh Adayin Loi Korev Olav Klum, mashma the B'di'evet, if you were Korev Olav Klum, even not a Tomid Shel Shachar, Korev Olav Klum, it's also Mechunach. So both these halachas are only L'chatchila. The chinuch of the kohen with a Tomid Shel, with a Minchas Chavitin, and the chinuch of the Mizbeach with a Tomid Shel Shachar, both these halachas are not ma'akiv b'di'evet, but nevertheless, we find it kind of strange that La'asid Lavoi in the Mikdash Ashlishi, the Hascholas HaAvodah will be b'di'evet. Either b'di'evet mitzad the kohen, who will be a Einay Mechunach because he won't be able to bring his Minchas Chavitin, because we'll first have to bring the Tomid Shel Shachar to be Mechad the Mizbeach, or a b'di'evet in the chinuch of the Mizbeach because the kohen will have to bring his Minchas Chavitin in order to be Mechanach himself. So it's a shtickle pella. But the pasuk says in the end of Malachi, Hine anoichi sholech lochem es Eliyahu hanavi lefnei bo yoim Hashem hagadol v'hanoyer. No, and Eliyahu hanavi we know is olav esara hashamayma. He wasn't toyim tam misa. And according to Chazal that say that Pinchas ze Eliyahu is a kohen, as it's mavur in the Gemara in Bava Metzia daf Kuf Yudalad Amid Beis. And since he's a kohen mechunach that never died, he doesn't need a chinuch. And Mamela, he will be able to be mechanech the Mizbeach La'asid Lavoi with a Tomid Shel Shachar. With a Tomid Shel Shachar. So I'm saying not only that the mitzvah of the Korban HaTamid appears in Parshas Pinchas and it's read in the time of Bitul HaTamid, but really the restarting of the Korban HaTamid is dependent on Pinchas, Ze Eliyahu, who will be the only one that will be able to start the avodah of the Mizbeach La'asid Lavoi with a Tomid Shel Shachar, to be mechanech the Mizbeach with a Tomid Shel Shachar. So after this, there must be meaning to the fact that the restarting of the Korban HaTamid is going to be through Eliyahu Hanavi. Maybe the pshat is like this, because why is the Tamid the first of all karbonos of the day? We know because Tadir, V'she'enoi Tadir, Tadir Koiden. Now, why is the Tadir Koiden? Why does the Tadir, something that's steady, why does that take precedence? It's l'chora counterintuitive. We would think that something that's not Tadir has a special chashivas in our minds, in our hearts. I mean, matzah comes once a year, the lulav comes once a year. I mean, it has much more chashivas than something that we do every day. But here we see that Tadir, V'she'enoi Tadir, Tadir Koidim. The Gemara even has a tzad to say that Tadir versus Mekudesh. The Tadir is Koidim to the Mekudesh. What's the mila of Tadir? So the pshat is because we know that what really shapes one's personality is something that he does consistently, steady, repetitious. Hergel naset teva. Something that you're murgulin, that becomes your teva. As we know, the chinuch is marich and mitzvah tezayin, and in many places that ha'odom nifal lefi pu'uloisav. A person is impacted by what he does, and the chinuch over there says that if somebody, even the most kind-hearted person, if he'll engage in achzorius the kemaisim alpi the tzivui hamelech, and he won't even have a choice, but if he'll do it over and over again, he will develop a cruel nature. So, as we know that the tough ratio gimel mitzvahs are almost exclusively about what to do and what not to do, and not about what to think or not to think, what to believe or what not to believe, because we know that ha'adam nifal lefi pu'uloisav v'achar pu'ulois nimshochem alavaves, and the mela doing something consistently is what is what impacts a person much more than doing something great. The Rambam says on the Mishnah, in the Pinchas Mishnah, it's v'hakoil lefi roiv ha'maaseh. The Rambam says that the Mishnah doesn't say lefi goydel ha'maaseh. The Mishnah says lefi roiv ha'maaseh, and he says l'moshel. If somebody will give an ani echad 1,000 zuz, it's a great thing. But if he gives 1,000 ani in one zuz, it'll have more impact on his personality. He'll become more of a nadiv by repeating the Maisa HaToiv over and over again. That's why the Mishnah says Hakoy lefi roiv hamaseh and not lefi goydel hamaseh. But so that's the mile of Todir. That's the mile of Todir. You know that there's a fascinating medrash that is brought in the Hakdama of the Ein Yaakov. But the Maharal brings it in the name of the Hakdama of the Ein Yaakov in the Nesiv Avas Hareya. He says, "V'timtza bechibur Ein Yaakov b'Hakdamas HaKosev shemotza bechibur midrash echad v'zel l'shoynei." They're talking about what's the klal gadol b'Torah. Ben Zoyma Omer Matzinu Pasuk Koilel v'hu Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Ben Nanos Omer Matzinu Pasuk Koilel Yosef. That's like Rabbi Akiva. V'hu v'ahavta l'reacho kamoicha. That's the klal gadol b'Torah. Shimon ben Pazi Omer Matzinu Pasuk Koilel Yosef v'hu es hakeves ha'echad tase ba'boiker v'es hakeves ha'sheni tase beinu arboim. Amad reploini al raglov. That's actually how it says there. Amad reploini al raglov. V'amad halachik ben Pazi. Diksiv kechol asher imaro islas tavnes hamishkan. So halachik ben Pazi, that the klal gadol b'Torah is not Shema Yisrael, is not v'ahavta l'reacha kamoicha. The klal gadol b'Torah is hakeves ha'echad tase b'boiker v'es hakeves ha'sheni tase beinu arboim. So what in the world could this mean? So this l'chora is expressing this idea that repetition, steady repetition, is what really makes a person become what he ought to be, and therefore it's hakeves ha'echad tase b'boiker. Don't look for something huge. Don't look for something big. Don't look for something that you consider more meaningful. It's the klal gadol b'Torah is hakeves ha'echad tase b'boiker v'es hakeves ha'sheni tase beinu arboim. However, avada, there's a downside to the todir, and the downside is obvious that when we do something over and over again, it can become robotic. We can lose our passion. So really, when Klal Yisrael stooped to that level, as the pasuk says, "Mi bikesh zois miyetchem remois chatzeiroi befivu b'tzvos of kabduni v'libam rachak mimeni." Their heart is not with me. The pasuk says, "Remois chatzeiroi." Mi bikesh zois miyetchem. The Avada Kodesh Baruch Hu asked that they should be oil regal. What do you mean? Mi bikesh zois miyetchem remois chatzeiroi. But remois chatzeiroi means trampling on my chotzer. What does it mean to trample on my chotzer? The pshat is when a person walks into the chotzer, into the mikdash, with his mind. If he has the presence of mind, he's not considered remois chatzera. He's not only entering with his legs, he's entering with his head. But remois chatzera expresses the idea that your head is not here, your heart is not here. It's just remois chatzera and mi bikesh zois miyetchem. So that's when there's a butal hatomit, because sometimes dafke, when there's a regression, when there's a hefsek, the hislavus is reawakened and the passion comes back. Al derech zeh, shviras haluchos. Shviras haluchos, why did Moshe Rabbeinu break the luchos? Because he saw that they said, Zeh Moshe ha'ish lo yadanu mehoyaloi, and they made an egel. That showed that they're clinging to the form, and they don't have that ability to connect to the to the pneumius. In other words, they see they became dependent on the Zemoishoish. People that can become dependent on the Zemoishoish, there's a concern that they might become dependent on the Luchos HaEvan, and those Luchos HaEvan might become an Avodah Zarah. And it's to the point that, like we say, that Kodesh Baruch Hu said to Moshe, Asher Shibarto, Yiyashe Koichach Asher Shibarto. The Gemara says in Menachos Daf Tzadik Tes that from here the meaning is Pa'omim Shebitulo Shel Torah Zuhi Yisuda. Rashi says that you mavatal Talmud Torah for Hachnosas Kalim for Alvoyas Ames. What does that have to do with Shviras Haluchas? Because if somebody is attached to the form, like to the Zemoy Shoish or to the written law as it's etched in stone, and there's no flexibility at all, so then it becomes an Avodah Zarah. It loses its dynamic meaning, and therefore Pa'amim Shebitulo Shel Torah Zuhi Yisuda Mevatlan Talmud Torah for a mitzvah oiveres. Often that both the bittul of the Talmud and the shvira of the luchas are both shaykh to the same inyan. Pinchas, who's bekanayas kinosi, he really doing a halacha ve'emorin king. He's stepping out of the line of kvius, out of the line of consistency, out of the line of what's steady and what's regular and what's expected. But he's the one that's mechadish the avodas hatamid, because only one that can sometimes go beyond. He reawakened the passion, and he will bring back the tamid, because the real tachlis is be'emes the tamid, but the tamid has to be kept alive with the non-tamid. Every Rosh Chodesh we begin the Kriyas HaTorah with a parsha of the tamid. And that's because be'emes you need them both. There has to be a balance. Every chodesh is a new oilas chodesh bechadshai, but it's a new hischatches, but it has to be attached to the tamid. And that's the big challenge of Adav Tfilo's been b'mokim tmidim tiknum, to daven the same thing time and time again, and to manage to give it new meaning and life, which is something that requires serious work. And it should happen when so it's something that's going on all the time. But Zokt Rashi that hayoim, that it should be like it was given today. Kol yoim v'yoim yiu beinecha kechadoshim. A person has to have the ability to make it new every day. Kechadoshim. Even though you're doing it non-stop, but nevertheless it's always fresh, it's always new. And that's what it says. Oilas tamid ha'asuya Bahar Sinai. Rashi says ha'asuya Bahar Sinai means in the Yemei Amiluim, or the oilos of Koydem Matan Torah, which means even though the tamid is something that you're doing every day, but every day it should be like the first day. Every day it should be like the Yemei Amiluim, the days of Chinuch. Every day it should be like Koydem Matan Torah. It should never become old. It should never become regular. So in other words, on one hand, we say that we need to have the Hergel Nase Teva, and our personality is shaped only by habitual doing. But at the same time, we have to constantly work on giving it life and giving it meaning and developing a passion in those kavua dikemaisim that we do. In any case, David is the helping that Yehofku, Yomim, Eila, L'Sosoin, U'L'Simcha. Okay. Seid gesund, Rabbi Say.